Support for In the Frame, Exploring the DIA is provided by Masco Corporation Foundation. Masco is a global manufacturer of home improvement and building products.
Hello, and welcome to In the Frame, Exploring the DIA. Today we're going to be looking at a category of objects that we call decorative arts. Fine arts in Western culture tends to be about painting and sculpture, and although painting and sculpture may have some kind of purpose, religious or political, to tell a story, to inspire, they're not actually functional in the way that we think of when we talk about the decorative arts. With decorative arts, by contrast, we're talking about objects that derive their existence from the need to fulfill a basic function: eating, getting dressed, those kinds of normal everyday things. These objects are taken, and through extraordinary imagination and skill, they are turned into absolutely wondrous objects. And joining me today to talk about some decorative arts will be specialist curators from the DIA. This extraordinary looking object is a hall stand. You can perhaps make that out by the mirror that's there, the hooks at the top for the coats and the hats, and then some notches down below for the umbrellas. It was designed by an artist called Hector Guimard, and you may be familiar with his metro signs in Paris. There are still just a few of them left. But when Guimard designed this hall stand, it wasn't designed to be seen standing alone in the way that we have it exhibited here. It was meant to be seen as part of a complete environment. In fact, the whole front hall was done in this style, with these beautiful curving carved woods and this painted tin with these unusual shapes on them. And then beyond that, the rest of the house would have been in variations on this particular theme. It's made in a style that we call Art Nouveau, which is French just for new art. And in Germany it was called Jugendstil, or the youthful style. And it was an attempt on the part of younger artists to make a style, to make works of art, furniture, especially decorative arts, that didn't refer back to other historical styles, the Gothic, the neoclassical, the classic, the Baroque, the Rococo, all of these things that got recycled in the 19th century. This was an attempt, as the name suggests, to make a new kind of art. But what happened in the end was that as they developed their vocabulary, they found that they turned more and more to the natural world, to the organic shapes. And you see this whole stand here, the way it's made, it looks as if it's sort of branches or reeds waving up, and all of these wonderful swirling shapes down below. And of course, it's extremely complicated. To make something like this, you had to be a very, very wealthy individual. It was an attempt to beautify the environment, but as so often when beautifying an environment through art, it can become very, very expensive. Art Nouveau was one of a number of movements around that time. It was related to other movements that tried to bring beauty into everyday life. The aesthetic movement that emphasized that beauty was everything. The arts and crafts movement, whereby craftsmen tried to make things, ordinary things, that would just simply beautify your life by having them around you. Teapots, all those kinds of things. Art Nouveau was very much part of that trend. Bold, modern, forward-looking. But like so much that characterizes the last decade of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century, it all came to a screeching halt with World War I. And by the time they started picking up the remains after World War I, the efforts to beautify life and to make furniture and this kind of thing be part of your life and be meaningful took a very, very different course.
It's a great pleasure to present to you today the most recent European decorative arts purchase. This is a magnificent amber and ivory box or casket that we acquired less than a year ago and found in Europe at the International Fine Art Fair. And while there, the most exciting work we found and were able to acquire for the museum was this extraordinary work in amber. Amber is something like 50 billion years old. It's discovered in the Baltic Sea, And this was by the famous court sculptor to the King of Denmark, Christian V, who later worked for the King of Prussia, Frederick I. Now, amber and ivory are both very rare and precious materials, particularly in the late 17th century and 18th century. The ivory comes from the mostly African elephant. The amber was found basically buried or underneath the Baltic Sea, which was once a coniferous forest 50 billion years ago, and then the sap from the trees turned into this lovely, beautiful sort of sunset-colored amber. You can see, if you look carefully at this box, which I invite people to do, the details of the insects and the plant life. You think of Jurassic Park and amber. The sculptor, Wolfram, put gold foil or metallic foil behind many of these cabochons or ovals, and so you could see through. The light would come through the box and would sort of radiate. His trademark was the sort of rosette pattern flowers you see in each of the corners, as well as integrating ivory with amber, and each of the ivory scenes depicts sort of a pastoral Roman campagna that come from engravings. We know the engraver, we know that Wolfram worked with these particular engravings, and he was famous for his work at the Danish court and then later at the Berlin court of the king. We were so thrilled to get this piece by Gottfried Wolfram because Wolfram was the primary sculptor who carved the famous amber rooms for Frederick I of Prussia, and Frederick I later gave these to Peter the Great of Russia. And many of you may have heard about the amber rooms that went to Catherine's palace outside of St. Petersburg and then were taken away by the Nazis after World War II. Some people think the room still survives. Other people believe it was destroyed in a firebomb as part of the end of World War II. We do know that the Russians felt so passionate about their amber room that over the last 60 years they have worked to recreate it. And if you go to Russia, one of the primary stops you'll make, and a very exciting one, is to see the famous amber room outside of St. Petersburg in Catherine's palace.
The art of stained glass forms a major component of the DIA's holdings in the decorative arts. Numbering over 67 panels, we have one of the best collections of medieval and Renaissance stained glass in the United States. Stained glass has a long history, dating back to antiquity as decoration for the homes of wealthy Roman families. But it was in the Gothic period, starting in the 13th century, that stained glass windows in churches really began to take off. The design of Gothic churches, with their soaring ceilings, called for large windows to be made of multicolored glass. It was believed that these beautiful objects would lift men's souls closer to God. Later in the 15th century, stained glass began to be viewed more as a picture and less of an experience of God's greatness. Here are two spectacular examples of early 16th century stained glass. They were made in Germany near Cologne and formed part of a larger glazing program, most likely of a manorial chapel. On the left, we see St. Barbara, who is identified by the tower she holds in her left hand. The tower refers to the one her father imprisoned her in a vain attempt to discourage her from converting to Christianity. The panel on the right shows St. Anthony Abbot, one of the most beloved saints of the later Middle Ages. He was known as a healer and is often shown with a pig, which is shown here at the bottom of his feet. Epidemic at the time was a skin disease named after the saint called St. Anthony's Fire, and pig's lard was one of the remedies for this horrible skin disease. The panels represent a major achievement in the art of stained glass. The painting and firing is of the highest level, as is the glass itself. And whereas in the figures in earlier examples tended to be flat, the ones shown here seem to exist in three-dimensional space. Large expanses of uncolored glass are balanced by intense areas of pot metal color, and the volume is further achieved by stippling, as you see here at the border of this mantle, as well as considerable use of silver stain.
We're in the Aviva and Jack Robinson Decorative Arts Galleries, and I'm here today to talk primarily about glass. Jack and Aviva are nationally and internationally recognized collectors of glass, and in 1995 they had an opportunity to make a significant gift and wanted to make that gift to the people in the city of Detroit, and also to set an example for philanthropy here. Jack and Aviva offered us their entire glass collection, which at the time had over 120 objects in it. The museum officials had conversations with them, the director and people in the development department, and in the end, their gift was not only the objects, the glass objects, some of which we'll talk about, but also they endowed 2 galleries, sponsored an exhibition, and sponsored a catalog and endowed the maintenance and care of their glass collection, which includes storage formats and a space in the basement. We're very thankful to people like Jack and Aviva Robinson for their generosity. The Robinsons' gift of over 120 pieces of glass made a significant difference to the DIA and how we represented the decorative arts. A gift of that size put the DIA among a small group of public institutions that have a major collection of glass. Now, in our galleries, we feature not only glass as a decorative arts, but we also feature ceramics, basketry, jewelry, textiles, and wood. I'd like to talk to you, though, a little bit about the Robinsons' gift and show you a couple of the pieces. We're looking at Dale Chihuly's vessel, Cadmium Red Light Venetian. And this is made by the great master in America, Dale Chihuly. Now, he studied glass. What's really important about his study of glass is that he went to Venice. And Venice is the city in the Western world most associated with glass making. Chihuly studied glass there and he studied the techniques. Let's take a closer look. You'll notice that this edge is made out of a beautiful striped piece of glass that has orange, yellow, and clear glass in it. That particular type of glass, where there are stripes of colors that are pulled out into a glass ring that's fused onto the vessel itself, is a technique that we associate with Venice itself. In addition, you have these horns of glass that are coming out. And that is also a Venetian technique, where glass is gathered at the end of a hot metal pole, and while it's still molten and hot, it's pulled out into this horn shape. The body of this vessel itself is quite beautiful, and you'll notice that there are very, very fine bubbles, or puliguzzi, in this. It's a type of glass that was invented in Venice and was for a long time unique to Venice. Now, may I just take a moment to talk a little bit about Venice, because it's such an important place for glass. And the reason I want to point this out is that since the 13th century, on the island of Murano, all the glass works that are of what we consider Venetian glass are on that island. And the industry has been very carefully regulated, and so that the Venetians were the only people in the Western world who knew how to make glass, and for several hundred years. Of course, the Venetians are also great merchants, and they learned this from their trade with the rest of the Middle East. In contrast to the work of Dale Chihuly, an artist like David Hutchhausen uses glass in a very different way. You'll notice that this object is very hard and polished, and he's using some of the properties of glass that have to do with its ability to reflect light and to magnify. You'll notice this oculus within the piece itself, how that cutting the glass changes its magnification and changes what it sees. So in fact, it collects a much larger image and focuses it into that area. Along the edges here are brightly colored pieces of glass, and those are actually fused or glued together in a highly specialized technique where the colored glass is cut into particular shapes and then glued or fused together and eventually fused onto this larger piece of very, very fine, clear glass. These are 2 different ways that artists work. That is the very organic way that Dale Chihuly has worked. He is blowing glass and working with molten glass and forming it, and you see that in the very liquid shapes of the horns and how the color navigates around the top lip. And that's in contrast to what David Hutchhausen is doing, which he's working with, it's called cold work. And in fact, he's working with glass that is cut and very highly polished.
This throne-like chair was designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh, a Scottish architect working mainly in Glasgow around 1900. Now, we may not think of Glasgow as a place much to do with art, but right around 1900 it was one of the most prosperous places in the world, and there was an explosion of ideas, artistic ideas, other ideas going on at the time. This particular chair was designed for a tea room, or a whole series of tea rooms, run by an entrepreneurial woman called Miss Cranston. Now, those tea rooms, it's not like a little tea shop that we might think of today. It's more like a sort of a large restaurant with all kinds of different functions, but tea was at the center of it. And this remarkable design, quite striking, it's very forward-looking. It was made so that when you put these chairs around a table, you created a room, and you sort of sat in this implicit room. You were separated off from all of the other people in these very, very large areas. You can see perhaps that it's been painted black and the paint has rubbed off. Mackintosh liked to paint his furniture. Sometimes it was white, sometimes it was black, sometimes he left it with the oak. And that strange lozenge form at the top there, that shape that's cut into it, actually derives from a bird in flight. Mackintosh was looking to nature, bringing a sense of nature into these chairs. But it also has a somewhat sinister quality, and it was exactly that quality that this artist, the artist who designed this chair, didn't like. Charles Voysey was an English architect and a somewhat less fierce individual, a rather gentle soul. He designed many buildings for England and influenced the style of the English house in the 20th century greatly, perhaps the greatest influence in English architecture. This chair looks back to the craftsmanship of the past. You can see it has a kind of a country quality that goes beyond the rush that's in the seat there. It has a very gentle, very warm feeling. And the clue to what Voysey really cared about is the heart that you can see carved into the back of the chair. The heart appears regularly through Voysey's work, and it's because he felt that love was the force that empowered art.
This is a masterpiece of design by André Charles Boulle, the great French eboniste to the King of France, Louis XIV. It was made about 1720 and has a wonderful harmony of design ranging from the lion's paw feet up through the tortoise shell and gilt bronzes up to the baldacchino type clock. This is basically a pedestal to support the clock above, and on the clock itself, you see a masterwork of the 4 continents. The 4 continents are in the front, Europe and Asia. Behind Asia is America, and behind Europe is Africa. And this is made of tortoiseshell backed with a gold leaf or gold foil that gives this wonderful golden color. And in the center, you see Hercules relieving Atlas of the weight of the world. It's all about time, and the Limoges enameled numbers, the numerals for the hours of the day, are made in Limoges, France, and the hour hand lengthens and shortens, as does the minute hand. The clockwork is made by the famous horologist named Julien Lenoir. So we were thrilled when we were able to acquire this magnificent example. This is considered one of the best designed clocks and most elaborate and sumptuous clocks anywhere.
When one thinks of decorative arts, one immediately thinks of purely decorative figures and objects. Yet the objects that now fall under the term decorative arts, what we in the profession call dec arts, represent the spectrum of material culture. Take, for example, this handsome soup tureen in the form of a turkey, which is one of my favorite objects in the collection. It was made around 1755 in Strasbourg, France, and served both a decorative and functional purpose. In addition to adorning the table, it was also used for serving food. If you look closely, you will see that the upper part of the turkey, the wings, the tail, and the head, form the top of the tureen, while the belly serves as a vessel for food. All the distinctive physical features of the turkey, such as the banded feathers, the wattle, which is that wonderfully wrinkly reddish growth covering the throat and neck, and the snood, the fleshy growth on top of the beak, are so convincingly represented that one almost forgets the turkey is made of clay. The manufactory that made this terrine, the Strasbourg manufactory, was famous for its large serving dishes made in the shape of commonplace vegetables or fowl. Shaped terrines remain fashionable to the present day. Hostesses now, just as then, are eager to adorn their dinner tables with sumptuous decor.
We're in the suite of galleries we call Fashionable Living, where we've divided the arts, particularly the decorative arts, in France, but also in Europe, into times of the day: morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. And we have a clock in each area, but we're showing here masterpieces of French 18th century silver that were used for dining. And these are some of the greatest, if not the greatest, pieces of silver by Thomas Germain in America, if not in all of the world. Thomas Germain was the greatest Rococo silversmith, or the silversmith for the king, Louis XV. He trained in Rome and he came to Paris, where he was working in the 1720s and particularly 1730s, where he did this extraordinary terrine we call the Boar's Head terrine, but it was made, first commissioned by an English baronet who was a bit of a card sharp playing in Paris, later sold to the Orleans family, and later owned by the King of France, Louis Philippe, in the 19th century, and has the king's coat of arms on both sides of the terrine. What is extraordinary about this is these very realistic animals and vegetables, the rabbit or hare, the ortolan, and the crayfish, along with morels and mushrooms and artichokes, very realistically cast from actual animals or vegetables, and then chased, beautifully chased and finished in silver.
In the 18th century, the art of dining reached new heights. Practical new forms, as generic as sauce boats and as highly specialized as mustard pots, were introduced in response to the increasing sophistication of the cuisine, as well as a growing concern for the diner's convenience and enjoyment. The sauce boat on a stand was made by one of the leading Parisian silversmiths, Henri Auguste. Sauce boats were an essential feature of an 18th century dinner service. No table would have been complete without them. Ours is most likely one of a pair. Sauce boats were ordered in pairs to complement the symmetrical arrangement of serving dishes and platters on the banquet table. The elegant silver mustard pot next to it once belonged to the Duke of Caudeval, a member of the Portuguese nobility. It speaks to the increasing importance condiments such as mustard had on the dining table. During the 18th century, mustard was served at the table in two ways, either as a powder sifted onto the food using a caster, or as a sauce for roasted meats. The shape of our mustard pot, which has an opening in the lid to accommodate a small serving spoon or ladle, indicates it once held the sauce type, made from black mustard seeds ground in either unfermented wine or vinegar.
I mean, I came to the Detroit Institute of Arts, became a member, became a volunteer, and I got a family and friends, and some of the best people volunteer here. It's so exciting. Then, a couple years ago, I would say about 5, I discovered something that was a bit of a secret, but it isn't anymore. The Detroit Film Theater, I fell in love with. And if anybody comes to the DIA, sometimes they don't know it's here. And it's absolutely breathtaking when you go into that theater. It's beautiful, the gold and the silver leaf. This theater has inspired people, like I've talked with other audience members, and they've been going to this theater for over 35 years. And they come to this museum every weekend to see these films, and they're brilliant. The Detroit Institute of Arts is definitely an asset to the community. What it does for a city, the art in the city kind of makes it glow, and we just want everybody to to experience it. The museum experience is very special in itself, and it does bring the community together.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of In the Frame, looking at some of the decorative arts in the DIA's collections. I hope you'll come down and take a look at them for yourself. For more information on DIA programs, go to dia.org. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is Graham Beale, your guide to one of America's great museums, the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Support for In the Frame, Exploring the DIA is provided by Masco Corporation Foundation. Masco is a global manufacturer of home improvement and building products. An encore presentation of In the Frame is available on demand for viewing at DetroitPublicTV.org.